Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey baby, hey. It's me, Mark, the bellhop, taking you to the very top of the Cobra Casino in Talking Joe, the leading dedicated G.I. Joe Comics Casino podcast. If you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, that being talkingjoe.co.uk. Today we'll be looking at the latest issue, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue 295, released on the 13th of July, 2022. It is the fifth part of High Stakes. And joining me, as always, it's a real Mongolian warlord. It's Genghis Tim. How are you, Tim?
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. I am well and slowly resuscitating in a vertical tank after my DNA matrix has been re-uploaded to my brainwave scanner.
Excellent. I was wondering what that green glow was. I thought we'd pick up with any other business from last episode and us getting confused about Dawn and Jinx specifically, and even when we weren't confused who we were, just mixing up their names. I noticed on the playback as I was editing that I did it as well, so we are both guilty of that.
Did you not record yourself several days later just saying each name and then you could patch it in awkwardly? So Mark, it would sound like you fixed a name where a name had been said incorrectly. Isn't that right, Mark?
No, I didn't do that, Tim. But I could have tried to make myself look better or just awkwardly edited. That would have been fine. But Diana Davis did let me know in the comments to the YouTube video that the Civi colour schemes for Dawn, Helix and Jinx slightly allude to their regular costumes, so that Helix is in yellow, Dawn is in black leggings, and Jinx is in a kind of red top. So there are little signifiers that are meant to help us there. But the black hair and sunglasses when we're looking at them close up, just little bit too close together for us to brains to keep on processing it in the right way, I think.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, team, for those color illusions. That is fun and helpful. And fun.
And I also actually spotted a couple of other Cobra symbology Easter eggs that S.E.A.N. Gallant had squeezed in that we hadn't picked up on at the time. So, you know how we were staring at that one panel with the Cobra, with the casino bat, putting some roses in a vase. And we were sort of lingering on that panel and all of the detail that had been crammed on that vase. There was actually a little mini Cobra sigil on that as well. And the other one was that on S.E.A.N. Gallant's blog, he just talked about some of his design process around some of the casino stuff, and he posted that the bellhop Cobra bat, which had that kind of Playboy bunny kind of look to her, the cart, the luggage cart thing that she's using has got these loops coming up, which kind of are meant to form a sort of slight Cobra symbol as well. So everywhere in the details. Oh, and also in the backs of the slot machine seats, they've kind of got these like lines kind of slightly alluding to the lines of the Cobra sort of sigil. I want to say gills, but they're obviously not gills, but you know what I mean. The fan of the Cobra hood.
The ribbing.
Yes, the ribbing. Oh.
There we go. Like how Brian Hitch draws arms and legs in the Ultimates and Ultimate Fantastic Four. Like very athletic clothing rib. Okay.
So that's on the seating. So today's issue credits, we have got writer Larry Hama as usual, artist S.E.A.N. Gallant as usual, inks Maria Keane as usual, colors Jay Brown as usual, letters Neil Utaki as usual, editor Riley Farmer not as usual, group editor Tom Waltz as usual, and research specialist Diana Davis as usual. So we've got a new credited editor there who replaced the former associate editor who had moved on to other and bigger things. Welcome, Riley Farmer, to the book.
Riley Farmer is a woman and has been at IDW since late 2019. But I have not seen her name on any other IDW books. So this name is new to me with this issue. So I haven't seen this on Transformers comics, although I will admit I have not been reading Transformers the last 2 years because I was so taken with the previous run. I had a hard time jumping into the new one. And I've been reading Turtles, but I'm 5 issues behind. But IDW has so many different kinds of books. There are licensed books like these. There are classic reprints. There's the new creator-owned wave of single issues that's starting this coming week. There are one-off graphic novels. So there are all sorts of places where if you only know IDW for Joe, Transformers, Pony, Turtles, Sonic, right, where an editor may have been previously.
I'm curious, Tim, just because I know you're such a massive Transformers fan as well as G.I. Joe fan, that you've not been reading it for such a long time. Do you think you're just going to have a massive binge and catch up at some point?
Yes, I can do that one simply. And this was happening during the John Barber, James Roberts run from, I don't know, what was it, 2011 to 2016 or so, where sometimes I would, my pile, it's like, okay, there's 4 months of each of these, plus all the other series, Windblade or a bunch of specials. So I would have a small binge to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sooner, yes. Yes, I'm a little embarrassed, but also I think everyone understands to some degree. Either you're busy with other stuff and you fall behind on some comics, or you read so many darn comics that you fall behind on some comics.
Mm-hmm.
And like right now, each week I'm reading whatever new X-Men titles there are for sure, and then that's sort of first. Because I've been really interested in X-Men since July 2019.
There's just too much darn stuff.
Yeah, and because I own a store, I can read it for free. Although if we only have one copy, I try not to bring it home because then we don't have that one.
I'm assuming that you, if you're reading something that I guess you're hesitant about reading a copy and then just sticking it back on the shelf. So
no, I did that.
No. Okay.
I did that. I was a little surprised when I learned that another store owner did that. But what this is how he phrased it to me. It was Tuesday night, right? So they'd gotten their shipment, but they couldn't sell anything till Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And he held up, I just happened to be there Tuesday night, and he held up these 4 comics. He said, well, this is what I'm reading for tonight. And he was bringing them back the next day. And I said, oh, do you like those series? He said, no, this is homework. I need to know what's new so I can talk to customers tomorrow. So, I mean, haven't you worked at a clothing store and you just try on all the jeans right before customers come in? Also, I should say, if I'm reading a copy that we're going to sell, I am not folding it and like licking my fingers and eating spare ribs. I'm barely holding the comic. White gloves, clean room. I dust it off at the end.
During the summer the other year, I actually bought a pair of white gloves because my hands were just getting clammy, and my brother teased me mercilessly about that because particularly with the modern stock and it's a glossy black page with black border, it will just pick up your fingerprints. So
absolutely, the photo I took of me holding issue 294. Which I posted on Facebook to send everyone to talkingjoe.co.uk to listen to our previous episode. That copy is a little wrinkly because it was a little humid when I read it, and that cover is half black. And yes, in a certain light, you can see all my fingerprints. That's my personal copy, so that's okay. And I find it charming that my own copies are not dog-eared, but they're not 9.9 pristine. They're like 9.2 pristine. The very first G.I. Joe comic of mine, I have read it a lot and it's a little worn. And when I was younger, that sort of made me sad. And now I realize that's actually perfect.
where did we get to? We were talking about the new editor. Excellent. So,
I think now you do the plot breakdown, or we talk about the covers.
we do covers next, don't we? So after a little detour talking about about the editor and going off in a different direction, let's bring it back to track with the gallery.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
So cover A is the fifth of 5 interconnecting covers by Freddie Williams II with colors by Fariza Kamaputra. And this is one of the more exciting of the 5 because we're not straight on. We're sort of all the way on one side or the other. So there's a little more sort of angle. There's more of sort of diagonal and curvature to it. There's a big hand. Whereas some of the other covers, there was sort of one finger. And the 4 Joes who are pictured here, Stalker, Beachhead, Covergirl, and Budo, are that much more dynamic in their poses. And then we see Zaymot and Tomax up in the top. So copy and paste from our last 4 Real American Hero episodes. In and of itself, I don't love this cover, although this probably works best of the 5 in and of itself. But I appreciate any kind of stunt like interconnecting covers to get people excited about this book. And then cover B is drawn by S.L. Gallant and with colors by J. Brown. And it's been unusual for Brown, who's the interior colorist, to color the covers. I was thinking, so this is a close-up of Serpentor. It's just his head with a little bit of his neck and the 2 snakes at his collarbone and his hand, and he's holding up one Cobra Casino chip in front of his eye, and he's looking straight at you, and he's smiling with his mouth, with his teeth together, and then you see some of his hood, his cowl behind him with a black background. And I want to get your take on this cover, Mark, because I hadn't seen this image until I got to the store. However, it was in catalogs or online solicits or people, you or websites previewing this issue. I sort of just hadn't seen this cover. And so it was, in an old-fashioned way, a surprise to see this cover for the first time at the comic book store. And as a sentence description, I really like this cover, right? Serpentor, bold shot of just his head holding up casino chip in front of his eye, leering at you, the reader. No background, or black background. I like the idea a lot. I don't like the execution. And some of it is the color. And I mean 2 things. I mean the color choices, and then also sort of the color treatment. So, I'm on record. I'm not the world's biggest fan of J. Brown's colors. And so in these 2 categories, if we're going with the original Serpentor costume, then shouldn't the bits on his hands and the snake on the left that's over his hand and the snake at his collar, those should be green. And I know that the Serpentor of issues 49 and 50, and I don't remember the Serpentor of around issue 211, how accurate they were to the 1986 toy. So when I look at this cover, I'm seeing 2 things. One, my brain sees this as a miscolored Serpentor, and 2, I see it as a much less interesting Serpentor because everything he's wearing is the same color. It's all that Serpentor gold. There's no green, there's no, black or orange or whatever it is, even down to the 4 fangs that are a part of his face hood mask, right? Even those fangs are this yellowish gold, and those are definitely supposed to be silver or white. And so in terms of color design, like color picking, I look at this and I think, okay, this is boring or rushed. But then in terms of treatment, like the light sources and how the sort of highlight on the top of everything is this sort of like mint green, but then the pink of the casino chip, but then the sort of like every like Caucasian complexion that Jay Brown does is this like very ruddy like a Caucasian person, which I always find unappealing. So what I actually see here are colors that clash with each other. And so A, it's like not the right colors for Serpentor. B, the actual color choices are unappealing. And then C, I don't like the treatment of the light source and then the secondary light source. And this is on top of, because I was looking at his eye and I'm looking at his teeth, and Shannon Gallant's storytelling is his strength.
Mm-hmm.
His raw drawing is secondary to his storytelling. You know, like how he poses characters in acting, in choreography, how he puts figure in ground, how he designs backgrounds, how he puts something in the extreme foreground, like panel 1 on page 1 of this very comic, right? And his storytelling is clear. But I've been thinking about this since I saw this cover on Tuesday. And there is a difference between an interior artist and a cover artist. And sometimes in comics, either because of scheduling or because the editors sort of pick, someone who does not make for the most exciting covers draws a cover. And I have a couple examples at the ready from the world of G.I. Joe. I'm thinking of, this immediately made me think of Action Force Special number 2. It's this cover where Buzzer is lighting a cigar. And it's just his head, right? And you see 2 fingers and a little bit of his collar, right? And there's a black background, and he's leering out at the reader. This one's a little different because he's wearing glasses. There's word balloons, but it's the same kind of general idea. And I don't know that I can be any more specific than this, because like drawing style and drawing skill are so myriad in the world of comics and illustration. But something about this Action Force Special number 2 cover strikes me as a drawing that feels like an interior drawing and not a cover. Some of it is the inking, the line weight, some of it's the anatomy, the drama of the scene. I don't know if our listeners can do this, but going back to Shannon Gallant's cover for 295, can you imagine if Mike Zeck had drawn this same image? Something about it. There'd be some minute differences in sort of the pitch of his head, the twist of his neck. The line quality would be different. There'd be a different arrangement of thicker and thinner lines. I think his nose would be, I don't know, sort of rounder. Something about, and I felt this way during Shannon Gallant's, 88 issue run when he was doing the covers. And his covers were, I think, always based on Larry Hama cover sketches. And I found a lot of those to be fine, but not exciting covers. So I like the idea of this cover. Don't actually like this cover. Before I jump over to the retailer incentive one, do you have a take on this?
No, I think those are very fair points. I guess the only other element that I'd call out was that, yeah, the solicits of the covers have been a little bit funny in terms of quite often the cover image won't be ready in time for the initial kind of blurb for the issue and the release date and the credits and so on, and so it sort of will drip out there into the internet. And you kind of have to go looking for it. So I went looking, and I did find this image a few months ahead of time. And when I saw it, it was like, oh, wow, okay. I guess they actually are going to do it. They are going to bring back Serpentor. And by issue 295, he's going to be front and center in the story, back in his uniform. And perhaps that might have been the original intent. But I think possibly in between the time that Shannon Gallant was given a steer on what to put on the cover and the script actually coming to fruition, maybe the story or the timing of the story took a little bit of a left turn, and we don't see Serpentor in his outfit by the end of issue 295.
What's the injury behind the casino chip?
So the injury, I think it is meant to be where he got the arrow in his eye
Aha.
in the original Death of Serpentor, and it's consistent with the treatment of the character when he appeared in the Death of Snake Eyes arc. Serpentor was carrying this injury to his eye. So yeah, it is consistent with the way that Shannon has been drawing Serpentor in his previous appearances to have this injured eye. It's interesting in terms of talk about an interior artist and and the cover artist, because the other two covers that we're going to talk about, John Royal and Dave Johnson, those are artists very much known for their cover work, and to some degree, I think that's because of the speed that in terms of creating cover, and that they simply couldn't produce 20 pages of a story in a fortnight in the same way that S.L. Gallant can.
Yeah, I also sort of this can expand beyond the world of G.I. Joe, because there are all sorts of artists who draw covers only for the big publishers, or interiors only, or both. And some of the people who do both are quite good at both. And there's no reason for me to just pick on Ron Lim. But sometimes I bring up Ron Lim because, Infinity Gauntlet is sort of in the ether with those movies, and Thanos, and I guess at my store that book is sort of shelved at sort of arm height. I don't have to look up to see it. Anyway, Ron Lim was, back in 2000 was going to maybe draw a G.I. Joe comic. So he's not quite in the world of G.I. Joe, but he's kind of in the world of G.I. Joe. And he's someone who's always drawn good interiors. And in the last 10 years, 15 years, he's only done covers for Marvel. He hasn't done interiors. And although I guess he came back recently for that Silver Surfer miniseries. And if you look at Ron Lim's cover to like Infinity War #1, like that's a perfectly good image. It gets the job done. But if you can put on your extrapolation helmet, right? Because Lim took over for George Perez halfway through Infinity Gauntlet, and then Lim drew the 2 sequels while he was drawing the monthly Silver Surfer. And if you can pretend that George Perez had stuck around and he drew the cover to Infinity War #1, like just 300 subtle decisions would have been made differently about how those characters are standing and looking at you and overlapping and their arms are crossed. And Ron Lim's cover to Infinity War #1 is not bad. It's not bad, but it doesn't have any extra oomph. And if you look at what's the nearest comparison, the George Perez covers to Infinity Gauntlet, they all do. Right. And like the cover to #1 has like painted color, so that may not be a fair comparison. But even something subtle in is it issue 3 or 4 or 5, where Adam Warlock is pointing and all the heroes are sort of coming at you out in space. This isn't this idea of cover artist, interior artist, or Shannon Gallant's strengths being interior storytelling. This isn't only in the world of G.I. Joe.
Yeah, for sure. I remember Declan Shalvey, who's very well known as a comic artist now, when he was starting out and doing the pages of the Thunderbolts and Dark Avengers, that he really wanted to do some of the covers, and as good as his interiors were, the editors were like, yeah, you're the skill set for a cover and for interiors are very different, and you need to sort of practice and hone to make a make a sort of a very visually striking, memorable cover before you get sort of start getting that work, and I think that is something he focused on, and he used his commissions as a kind of exercise tool to kind of be practicing drawing cover worthy images to kind of up his game, and now is very much known as a cover artist and variant cover artist, very much in demand as well.
That's a nice comparison. And again, I don't want to say that a headshot of Serpentor leering at the reader holding a casino chip isn't cover worthy, but I think the treatment of it is where you have leeway. retailer incentive cover. It's penciled by John Royal, inked by Jagish Kumar, and colored by James O'Frady. This team has done many of these retailer incentive covers. The Baroness and a Polar Assault Trooper. And
Snow Serpent.
Snopes. That's a mistake for me going back to 1985. Always conflating those two, the name and the term. And then behind them, a wolf, a cobra wolf. Sadly, we can't see the Ice Viper either in the cockpit or sort of standing in front of it or behind it. That would have made this cover so much sweeter for me. So we have had an Arctic themed cover relatively recently by this artist and colorist team, and that cover was a real treat. And here's sort of the opposite of it. This one, these two characters are looking at you, the reader. Baroness is straight on, and the Polar Assault Trooper, the Snow Serpents are Snow Serpent is a little bit aiming to the right. Behind him is, I think, is that a ski? What's the thing with the Cobra logo?
Yeah, that's my guess. Is it's a ski with a Cobra logo on it.
Okay. I only
Cobra
ask
logo
because,
is a little bit precise, isn't it?
Yeah, I only ask because if it's a ski, shouldn't there be two? And if it's a ski, wouldn't it curve? I sort of think it might be just some canister of, I don't know, soup.
Maybe he's a one-legged Snow Serpent.
So what's interesting about this cover is how there are a lot of different blues in this cover, but if you squint, it sort of, in a good way, all becomes one blue. The characters pop enough because they are lighter, and there's some subtle highlighting around them. So the vehicle becomes part of the background. This is really satisfying cover, and I think the Baroness has sort of goggles, not quite glasses. And also, it needs to be said, the Baroness is not in her regular outfit. She's in an Arctic version. She's in all white, and I don't think there's ever been a toy of that.
No,
right?
right.
She's been in all red, and she's been in all blue, more like the cartoon. And of course, she's been in black, and there have been some variations with a little more black or a little more dark gray. And so as a gimmick, I think it's fun that the Baroness would be in all white. And we have had a Snake Eyes who's in mostly white. I do think that is opening a can of worms, because realistically, if the Joes are going to have an Arctic mission, they're all going to be wearing like white coats and white pants. And it is reasonable for Snake Eyes to have an all white version of his costume and the Baroness to have an all white version of her costume. But once you start doing that, it's like, well, everyone is going to have, it's like, well, then Lifeline should have a white version of his costume. And Ice Cream Trooper should have white versions of their costumes. And then you sort of, it's like, well, let's take our 250 G.I. Joe characters and redo them all in white and light gray and light blue. The gimmick sort of undoes itself, because I'm also perfectly fine with the Joes just going into the Arctic wearing sort of what they wear with like white hats and white coats. And so I'm not going to think anymore too hard about what this cover sort of portends. And maybe the Baroness is sort of interested in fashion in a way that none of the other characters in G.I. Joe are. You know, it's like Dr. Mindbender wouldn't have white pants if he's on an Arctic mission, right? Because it's also like, well, he'd wear a coat because he's going to get cold. So I like this cover. I think it also would have been fine if she had been in her normal black costume. But yes, as a not a gimmick, but a treatment for color decisions on this cover, this is nice.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I read online that people were I read a line from one person who was complaining that he couldn't find this cover apart from $50 online on eBay from another retailer.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I usually don't look at these on eBay, but I happened to look at this cover on eBay this week, and I saw two going for $50, and I'm not sure. I don't know what the other, what $294, $293 retailer incentives go for. So that's to say that this is a lot more than normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they noted that quite often they'll find it for closer to, I think, 30 or something like that, and this one seemed to be more, and they weren't sure why, because I think it's still a 1 to 10 ratio, and the answer seemed to be boobs.
I think both the first is definitely correct, and the second I would agree. It is a 1 in 10 I think if you have people who are occasionally buying these, not the people who buy every one of these, they might be more interested in the one with the Baroness if they only show up occasionally. It's also possible that just as we get closer to 300, more and more people are paying attention. But, do the math. If you are a store, to be able to sell one of these, to be able to get one of these, you have to order 10 copies, right? And to sell 10 copies, that's $40.
Yeah. And as we know, not every single store is going to be able to sell 10 copies, at least not to their regular audience. So
right.
They want to cover their costs and make a bit more on top.
And then there's this online exclusive cover drawn and colored by Dave Johnson, which is it 3 or 4 connecting covers?
3 connecting covers.
Okay. And so this first one has Snake Eyes sort of lunging toward us. Behind him are Duke and Roadblock missing a mustache, and 3 Sky Strikers. And there's a geometric shape at the top and bottom of this cover. There's a curved blue thing which sort of represents some kind of foreground element that Snake Eyes has planted his hand on, like we're looking through sort of a curved window that he's jumping out from the battle into wherever we are. Do you have a take on what this shape is?
It's a bit James Bondy, isn't it? It's almost like just the
iris of a camera or a gun scope.
Yeah, a bit like that, isn't it? I don't know. I'm just wanting to look at the combined image to remind myself of how it all looks. Oh yeah, it's sort of combined. It's kind of like a swooshing kind of shape. It's kind of the flowing Cobra Commander cape almost, sort of flowing out and
yes.
up above and below, and then they're sort of creating a kind of interior of the cape where there's an image framed against it. But it's very stylized kind of image.
Dave Johnson draws really well. His covers, he is such a designer. He's thinking about shape. He's thinking about shapes, negative space, positive space, geometric shapes. He deals with type. Like you look at his Punisher Max covers when Jason Aaron was writing Punisher, and this was right after the Garth Ennis run. And Dave Johnson, or this upcoming cover for it's the first regular issue after the special of Batman: The Audio Adventures, right? Like this logo on the bottom of that cover, like that is acting as a giant shape, a giant compositional element that Batman can swing around or sort of spatially react to. And Johnson's covers are so bold, and his drawing skills are great, right? And his coloring skills are great. You look at this G.I. Joe cover that he's done, and there are kind of just 5 colors on this whole thing. It's like 2 or 3 blues. There's the gray. Like all of Snake Eyes is this one gray, where Snake Eyes isn't inked. He's just this one gray. And that doesn't look lazy or unfinished. That doesn't look like interior colors versus cover colors, because I never said cover colors had to be painted or rendered. And you have these 3 very clear planes. You have Snake Eyes and the blue element in the foreground. You have these 2 or 3 Joes in the middle ground, right? And they're all kind of just 2 colors, sort of the brown, orange, beige of Roadblock Duke. And then you've got a bunch of black behind them for some smoke. And then it's that light blue that is sort of the distant sky. And Johnson, he can paint and he can render. And when he's coloring, when he's not painting, he tends not to render. And you could call it old school, you could call it limited, you could call it more structural, but I'm always happy to see a Dave Johnson G.I. Joe cover, and I'm a little sad that we've seen so few. And it was in the other G.I. Joe continuity. You know, we've never seen a Dave Johnson cover for Real American Hero. And I know I bring up Mike Zeck a lot, but you know, his shadow over Real American Hero looms pretty large because of that cover run. Dave Johnson with the right editor and throwing the right amount of money at Dave Johnson, if his schedule allowed for it, like Dave Johnson could be this era's Mike Zeck for G.I. Joe. It's like, why isn't there a run of 27 amazing Dave Johnson Real American Hero covers, regular covers, not crazy variants?
And as we get to see more of this cover, it sort of also alludes to kind of actually tying into this story, because, well, this is quite a sort of generic pin-up, really, of Snake Eyes. The subsequent covers, we get to see Dawn and Laura and Mindbender and Serpentor. So, quite exciting that it is kind of, not just purely a splashy front cover, but also tying into the interiors as well. And this is available on IDW Publishing's website, $10, and still in stock at the time of recording.
To answer the question that you didn't ask, no, I shan't be ordering one of these for myself. I'm happy to save the JPEG.
Online exclusive, not for the likes of you, Tim.
If my store were also a web store and I could get it at wholesale, would I get one for myself? If I could do it easily, would I get one for myself? Sure. But there are so many retailer exclusives and online retailer exclusives for G.I. Joe. And to say the opposite of what you just said, most of them are just random pinups of Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow or the Baroness. And those are great. I don't need them. Let's talk about the comic.
As Laura assembles her team ready to capture Snake Eyes, Mindbender and his Technoviper, who I will call Geoffrey, realise that Casino Bats are Revanche Sleeper agents. Mindbender calls Vipers and Technovipers to draw weapons and report to the lab. Genghis Cobra, as we now call him, awakes. He needs to be connected to the brainwave scanner to make implanted memories coherent and accessible. The Joes make their way to Mindbender's lab via an elevator shaft and utility corridor, but encounter another set of casino bots. The Joe perimeter team also encounter a lone casino bat, but make short shrift of her, ripping off her head. Alpha 001 closes the barn door after the bats have bolted, issuing an order to stand down and refrain from blowing their cover. Too late, Alpha 001. Meanwhile, the Joes kill the power and breach the lab, but attack without firearms to prevent damage to the brainwave scanner. Jinx takes the chance to launch an attack from her hiding place behind the Cobra troops. They're victorious, but Dawn is upset that she is not able to use the brainwave scanner to offload Snake Eyes' memories, and they are given an order to exfiltrate with Mindbender and Geoffrey the Technoviper as captives. But as they make their way back out via the utility corridor that we know so well, they are surprised by Laura and a squad of assorted Vipers. Scarlet is surprised as Laura reveals, "We're right here, Red. The casino and island are locked up tight. None of you are getting out of here. Dun, dun, dun. To be continued."
When I got to this final panel, I was let down that To Be Continued had a period. I thought it really wanted an exclamation mark. And I think most, maybe all, most of the IDW Hama G.I. Joe comics that have ended with those three words have ended with a period. But I feel like there's some stakes on this final page, and 300's coming up soon. Also, I was so hoping that after the following page with a cover for the next issue, that past the page turn, we'd get the letters page back. But no, still no letters page.
No letters for you, Tim.
So what is your top-down reaction to this issue, Mark?
So, before I get to my top-down, let's keep things positive. Well, I done read a heck a lot of comics. Some of them are great, the team are all on it, but some are a bit cack. They really are whack. Before the nitpicks come out, I'll giving it my bestest, and nothing's gonna stop me from trying to be positive. So I'll pause my scorn to put up 2 thumbs and turn my frown upside down. Take advice, it cannot wait. Say something nice. I'll say something nice. Let's go with making sure that at the outset we say something nice.
Oh, well, then I'll talk about my top down.
Very good.
I liked this issue. I do think that based on sort of how we talked about the previous issue, my comment for the previous issue was that the previous 2 issues should have been smushed into one issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so following up on that, I'd be quite happy if this issue, 295, were sort of 294, and we'd still have an extra 20 pages until 300. And while several of our players are still in the same places, the 3 Joes outside in the woods are still there. Jinx is still hiding behind the giant test tube. Cobra Commander is still chatting it up with vacationers. The ninjas are still, sneaking around the casino. While physically characters haven't moved much, I thought the action in this issue was quite good, and the smaller steps forward in the narrative were satisfying. So I'm not sure which way Laura's going to go, if she's going to betray Cobra or be a good Cobra after all. I thought the bits with Genghis Khan, right, as Serpentor, where he's sentient and he's following the action with his eyes, and then he taps on the inside of the glass, and then he reacts when the power gets cut, right? And then Mindbender is worried about him. I thought that was all compelling, and this comes from a guy who does not want Serpentor to come back and is still puzzled why Hama wants Serpentor to come back, right? This still feels like, I don't think this is not what happens. This still feels like Hasbro is making this happen. Like there's some Serpentor action figure, but I know that's not how the comic works anymore, right? These characters don't have to show up because there's a new toy. Hama's off on his own.
And we've also sort of zigged in a kind of slightly different direction, that they're not, that Mindbender's no longer calling him Serpentor, he's now calling him Genghis Khan or Genghis Cobra. So it kind of feels more like we're kind of ending up with a new character rather than just Serpentor again, which maybe was kind of the initial idea before Larry Hama changed things as he, made it up going along.
That's interesting to me in a way that Serpentor is not. Particularly, like, if he has a slightly different name, if he has a slightly different costume, if he is a different character, then it doesn't feel regressive. If it's going to be Serpentor, I need a lot more emotion from Mindbender besides that 1 or 2 word balloons an issue or 2 ago about how Cobra Commander's not a great leader. Because this seems pretty easy for Mindbender to pull off. And, we talked before about how the creation of Serpentor is a big deal in the cartoon and is quite abbreviated in the original comic book, issue 49. And I think that's it, right? Or maybe a little bit of 48. So if it's going to be Serpentor, that is disappointing to me. If it's someone new, and I really want them to put on clothes, right? Like, I don't want them to give a speech like naked and wet in front of a shattered giant test tube, because part of what jazzes me up about G.I. Joe is the costumes and the gear. And part of what disappointed me about the original Serpentor in the comic is that his costume was not fully out the version from the toy and the cartoon. It was, like orange pants and like a cape and like no shirt. It's like, no, the comic book is the place where you do draw the really detailed, impossible to animate thing covered in scales. And it's like, no, the cartoon should have dropped the shirt and given him orange pants.
I was almost sort of struggling to think to myself, what would I give as my big positive? And I think you've kind of knocked the nail on the head with it. I think one of my big positives from this issue would be those Genghis Khan moments where he's sort of silently in the tube, really doing some great acting and great moments, without the dialogue, and being that sort of looming, slightly eerie presence. There's this moment where Laura is sort of talking to Mindbender, and she says, "I'd better go assemble my team. What should I tell casino patrons if they get curious?" "You'll figure something out." "I'll figure something out, all right, but it's not going to be what Dr. Mindbender has in mind." And Genghis Cobra is looking at Laura as she says this. And I wondered, Tim, what do you think Laura means by that? "I'll figure something out, all right, but it's not going to be what Dr. Mindbender has in mind."
I think ultimately she is going to betray Cobra. That groundwork has been laid. This is a theme that Hama uses, redemption and forgiveness. And if she's going to be a villain, she hasn't been cruel enough. So even though I'm not entirely sure one way or the other, it feels like she's going to be some kind of good guy. But also Hama may not know. Maybe it's like the Don Marino Snake Eyes costume that he designed. Maybe Hama, like 3 weeks ago, sketched out some G.I. Joe costume for Laura when she becomes a Joe. Code name the seatbelt or something.
Ouch.
Ouch, come on. I'm just looking for, this joke. I'm just looking for any 2-syllable compound word, like pothole, roadblock, claymore, shotgun,
eye
like
patch,
spotlight. Right. Oh, no, thank you. Eye patch. There you go. That's
maybe what she's doing is that she's not stopping the Joes to interfere with them and capture them, but she thinks that she might be able to actually help them with their scheme to use the brainwave scanner, possibly.
Something else that works for me in this issue. Should I say more nice things?
Yeah, go for it.
I know I spent some time on this in the previous episode, but and we have heard, I believe, from Shannon Gallant that these issues are drawn with a very quick turnaround, like quicker than normal or quicker than you'd want for 20 pages. And while, like the fine detail in a background, lots of thin, crisp lines describing pipes and doors and chairs, that's not all there. And, faces are not like filled with fine detail, but Gallant's never drawn that way. His faces are more simple than not. His poses and his choreography is just great. So, page 9, panel 1, where Dr. Mindbender and Geoffrey are pulling the tube.
Yep.
Mindbender is leaning back the way that you do when you're like playing tug of war. And between Mindbender and Geoffrey, across the entire book, there's a lot of great body language of pointing, sort of palms up and hand out, like the sort of ta-da pose, or like, look over here, let me present you with this, or are you sure?
Just you mentioning Dr. Mindbender's body language really chimes with me, because we've been reading the Devil's Due issues in parallel with this, and I've just recently been reading issue, I think it's 36 or 37 of the Devil's Due, where Dr. Mindbender is actually sort of a prisoner, and he's dangling from a ceiling in chains, and the body language there is just a bit off, that he's sort of like holding himself very sort of straight and parallel, whereas if you're being dangled from a ceiling in chains, your gravity is pulling you down and you're being stretched out. And it's great to see sort of the body language, pulling back on that hose, as you point out, really looks very naturalistic and thought out in a way that other artists might not just instinctively get.
Yeah. I had a teacher in school who said that animators are actors who draw, or artists who act. And that probably comes from an animator, from a famous animator who worked in the studio system in the 40s or 50s or 60s. And the same can be said for comics. And one of the things I would occasionally say to my students is, you have to get up out of your seat and move. Maybe you are taking pictures or video of yourself moving, or maybe you're handing your camera to someone and getting reference photos of yourself taking a pose. Not just because it's sort of hard to figure out what the pose is, but because if you draw your entire career sitting at the same chair, looking at the same drawing board, or, drawing onto the same tablet, your sort of stimuli gets narrow. And Gallant, his acting and his poses and his fight choreography is always clear, is always exciting, is always convincing and sort of true, and never gets boring. And I don't have an example at my fingertips, but I think we've all seen like boring action comics that are, it's like, well, it's some people shooting or some people punching or some people fighting with swords, but there's not a lot of interesting overlap. There's not a lot of interesting sort of dominant shapes. There's not a lot of interesting interplay between positive space and negative space. And by that, I mean positive space is like characters or important props, and negative space is like around their head or like under their arm or between their knees or like next to them where you see to the background or to the sky. The bottom of page 6, Sean, as Throwdown, Snake Eyes, is dodging 2 missiles, and he's drawing his sword. And Gallant puts the camera on the ground, aiming up. He doesn't have to do that, right? That does accentuate that this character is dodging these missiles that have been fired at like roughly 5 feet. And then 2 panels later, Scarlet has her machine gun, and similarly, we are looking up at her. Camera is on the ground, tilted up a little bit. And then go back to page 3. This might be my favorite panel in the whole comic. The final panel of this page, it's a horizontal panel. It takes the whole tier, and 4 Joes are running left to right, and Dawn is yelling something. And in the foreground, we're looking past 2 sets of running legs. And then in the middle ground are 2 more Joes who are also running. And then the background is the wall with all the piping. And Gallant puts the camera on the ground and aims it up a little bit, not as much as those other 2 panels. And this is already on a page where on the first panel in the elevator shaft, we're looking down. It's just a lot of variety. And if you are new to drawing comics, you might think of this like, again, using a movie term, moving the camera around in a scene in an arbitrary way. And as you practice storyboarding, drawing comics, animating, you start to figure out that certain actions or beats or emotions suggest a certain angle, point of view, camera height. And it's not always like one is the answer and the rest don't work. So this panel on the bottom of page 3 where the 4 Joes are running, just the fact that we get to see Scarlet in the negative space under, I think it's Sean. Actually, I don't know whose boots are on the left. But anyway, that doesn't add a lot. That's not like a brilliant decision. That doesn't change the story. It is a small enhancement. It adds some visual pep to this. And you see how much, what I'm trying to get to is that part of why I appreciate Gallant's storytelling so much is that, and I'm going to jump to another page to make this point. He can cram in so much that is clear, and he's accentuating all of these sort of moments of action. I'm never lost, but he's only ever enhancing them. So like all the stuff that gets crammed into this page in terms of storytelling, right? Ninjas in the elevator shaft. But what does he do? All 4 of them are holding on to different elements in different ways. So there's visual variety. And then in the next panel, Throwdown is starting to draw his sword while we're looking past him as we see him see an elevator door that's marked with important information. And then the next panel, we're now on the outside and he's broken his way through. And everything about his pose, where his upper hand is, where his lower hand is cocked back, right? Can openering the elevator door with his sword.
Gronk.
And then Gallant needs a little extra space for Helix to overlap the panel gutter. And so he puts her on top of it, which G.I. Joe, as a sort of like conservative or like old school traditional, like not a lot of splash pages, full bleed. We tend to have white gutters. We tend to have rectangular panels. We don't get a lot of overlap like this. There's a little bit on the page ahead of this, the page before this, where Laura's head overlaps a panel gutter just slightly. But back here on page 3, right, Helix is both looking up at the ceiling and shooting the ceiling piping and also holding her machine gun at the same time. And there's space for a word balloon while she's explaining this. And there's a sound effect. And there's the flash of the camera being shot. And all this happens on one page. And I wanted to so that's page 3. So 4, 5, 6, 7. I want to spend a minute on page 7, which I already mentioned, because the thing that happens here that I like so much is that Gallant does the same thing. There's a lot of clear action. There's a lot of variety. But look what happens in the first 2 panels. Scarlett's saying, I've got flamethrower mouth, and she's firing with her machine gun. And flame is going over her head. So she's ducking it the way that Throwdown ducked the missiles previously. And on the next panel, there's all this information. This is the magic of comics. You can't quite do this in storyboarding or animation, right? But you can have all this stuff happening simultaneously and also sequentially. So Scarlett's machine gun is firing past the border. So it's now effectively in panel 2. Dawn is saying, Sean, I need your sword. You go left to right. A centimeter to the right, she's got her hand open, ready to catch his sword. And then a half a centimeter above it, he has already thrown the sword. And then just to the right of that is his, I have just thrown a sword pose, right? You could break that into 2 separate beats, into 3 separate beats, where she's like, Sean, throw me your sword. And then the next panel, he throws her the sword. And then the next panel, she catches it. Like, that would also be fine. That would have a different feeling, a different rhythm. But let's stay on panel 2 for a second, right? I sort of had lost track that one of the robots had a flamethrower in its mouth. So in panel 1, where Scarlett says, I've got flamethrower mouth, well, there it is on panel 2, right next to, in front of Dawn. But it is, and flames from it coming out of its mouth, but it is also getting shot, right? So the bullet that Scarlett is firing in panel 1, not like directly linearly, not in a straight line, but in the next moment, in the next panel, in the next division of space, that bat's head, the back of it's getting blown out. Right. And then this sort of overlapping continues again to panel 3, where now Dawn is doing something with the 2 swords. She needed 2 swords to be able to do this thing. Good thing she caught that sword in the previous panel, where she also asked for the sword and caught the sword. And then, this very like Larry Hama, like wink moment, clang, clang, scree. I'm going to add a brap, which isn't actually there. And then, are we cool? We're just getting warmed up. Like you get closure on this scene. This fight scene is only 2 pages, and Hama like sort of nudges you with his elbow. Like, aren't these characters cool? Aren't they the best? But like, there's more to come. So you think of action artists in comics, and I don't mean necessarily superhero action, but sort of more like punching, driving, shooting, grappling hooks, repelling, ninja stuff, flipping, and this page is really satisfying. So sort of the winner for me in this issue is that, yes, characters don't move very far physically. We don't have a lot of new information about, finger quotes, Serpentor, but the moving of the smaller moving of pieces in this issue is quite satisfying and exciting.
Something I picked up sort of looking at the details as you're talking it through as well is that these 3 casino bots are all very subtly different as well. So they've got 3 different sets of armaments in the same, similar vein to the 3 ninjas all the way back in issue 21, but also, very small kind of visual differences. So you've got the armaments being 2, one has 2 swords coming out of her wrists, one has 2 rocket launchers, and one of it has a flamethrower mouth. And then beyond that, the look of them, one of them has got hair in a knot, and also boots instead of stilettos. Another one has got her hair loose, and another one is the kind of the Playboy bunny bellhop with the serpent headband thing going on. So yeah, very similar characters on first glance, but actually in terms of the detail and the fact that they've all been differentiated with these different sets of weapons, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, that's a helpful writer tool, like Hama gives that to himself so he can tell them apart, so he can maybe have them do different things, so his artist can do different things with them. You know, like imagine if this scene were just 3 regular cobra bats. It's like, okay, well, you and I are thinking of the toy. So it's like, well, one has the flamethrower hand, one has the hand, and one has the claw hand. It's like, well, that was never part of the comic. Or if it's just 3 regular 1986 Vipers, you know, it's like, well, they're all the same. Well, like, well, why not make one a Viper, one a Frag Viper, one a Hydro Viper? I will click back to these 2 pages that I just talked about. Well, mostly page 7, but I think pages 6 and 7 together represent a good. So one of the things that's always hard for me about the IDW Real American Hero book are the color choices and color treatment that come from Jay Brown. And these 2 pages, and I'm holding the comic in front of me, so if you're reading this digitally, you may not see them next to each other. But if you squint, these pages sort of become, for me, like mush. Every panel has too much going on just in the color. And in isolation, many of these decisions from Brown would be fine. I think panel 2 of page 6, where the 3 bats start to attack, there's this very active sort of splatter background. And within the splatter, there's a gradient. There's like light yellow and medium green and dark green. And then it happens again on the next page where Helix fires her machine gun. Certainly in those 2 panels, you can have something more happening in the background. But there are so many different colors across these 2 pages. There are muddy backgrounds. There are light backgrounds. The panel on the bottom of page 6 where Throwdown Snake Eyes is ducking under the missiles. There are so many different colors in that background of speed lines. And then Throwdown himself has this, you know, gray with these sort of brightened white highlights on them, which never work for me. It just looks dashed off, like every single panel of Snake Eyes ever. And, you know, I made a point in my 40th anniversary special blog post, the redo of Silent Interlude. I made a point about one panel that Jay Brown had colored where I thought the background was really unappealing. There was a gradient from sort of like peach to like gray purple. And I'm seeing that kind of thing again here on page 6 in the 3rd panel behind these 3 bats that are attacking, right? There's this, on the left of it, behind the swords, there's this like green, gray, brown that becomes this gray mustard that becomes this yellow. There are too many colors and they're too active. And I think what Brown would benefit from is making fewer choices. And if half these backgrounds were just one color, just a light gray or a light blue or a light olive drab or a light tan, and the character and the character color and the excitement of all of the like active color in the flame or all the active color in the like machine gun flash, that could jump out. But I see a lot of Brown's colors fighting with each other. And it happens again a few pages later when the Joes, there's that 2 pages where the Joes are fighting all the Vipers. And there's that panel where Dawn and Snake Throwdown both slash with their swords. That's another 2 pages where I squint and I just see a cacophony of like purple, brown, red, brown, blue, brown, 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 orange, brown. And like, I would be interested in seeing Jay Brown's flats. I'd be really interested in seeing his colors when he's only 20% done with every page. Like green tank for the Serpentor clone. Like, okay. Green or blue computer monitors in Dr. Mindbender's lab. Okay. Just that one green, just the one blue. But, you know, by the time he starts like doing these sort of fuzzy highlights and all the Vipers and the Technovipers in this fight, it's too much. Sort of it overloads the pages.
If I change tack slightly, you kind of alluded to this a little bit about sort of most of the Joes, most of the characters kind of remaining in very similar scenarios to how we've seen them in previous issues, and I was going to repeat the point that I had last time around a kind of a sense of déjà vu and frustration that things aren't moving forward quite fast enough. That we've got Dawn and Helix fighting casino bots in the service tunnels again, and they actually say no models we haven't engaged before, so no surprises. Yep. Jinx is still in Mindbender's lab waiting for a diversion, and Laura and Mindbender are still in his lab talking about Serpentor project and capturing Snake Eyes. So that's the kind of the glass half empty view, but the glass half full kind of view of that is that, you know, this has been playing out over a few issues now, and the threads are kind of pulling together. So Genghis Cobra awakes, the casino bats are kind of uncovered, and everyone knows what's happening with them. And after talking about troubling memories in the setup on the train in part 1, Dawn is face to face with a brainwave scanner, and after talking about Mindbender and Laura talking about capturing Snake Eyes, at the end, the very final page, it seems like the crew are seemingly captured. So it's all, you know, while things moving slowly, it is all coming together. And I get the sort of sense that, you know, some of the frustration is we're, you know, reading this issue by issue, and also, you know, aware that we've only got so many issues before we get to 300 and the series finishes at IDW. And that may be making us feel a little more pressurized. But I guess I've got a sense that maybe as a trade paperback, reading everything all together without maybe those same issue by issue experience, it might read slightly better.
Yeah, I share your concern that the looming deadline, the end point of issue 300, is making difficult the sort of the like organic like spread of drama and action, that some things are happening very slowly and we're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of space. And issue 300 is going to be, IDW has a term, oversized. That means 4 additional pages. I'm hoping issue 300 will be double sized, which would be, you know, 10 or 20 extra pages.
I get the sense that they're going to try and do a few things that are extra special. Just this very week, Nitho Diaz tweeted talking about that he was back on Joe doing something special. So his exact words were on Twitter, this is, after a long time, I got back to do a few pages on a G.I. Joe book again. Fun fact, Larry wrote fight and more fights for 3 pages, so I had plenty of liberty to write Dawn and Sean fight choreography. Of course, I would start with a splash page. So you were mentioned, actually, I think it was the last episode, that that Serpentor cover for the collection might be the last thing that Nitho draws on G.I. Joe, but it sounds like we're getting some sort of return. And I think I saw something about Ron Joseph doing some work for G.I. Joe, possibly for a cover as well. So I'm getting the sense that there's some things working away in the background where they're trying to pull together some of the artists again to do some special things for the final issues.
I wonder if it's that is special to me. I wonder if it is as straightforward as issue 300 is double sized. We're going to have the regular guy draw most of it, and we're going to have these other people come back and help out and do a few pages each because it is double sized, and it's hard for an artist doing a regular monthly book to also fit in a double-sized issue. And that, you know, having artists from the last couple of years return for such a reason is a celebration in and of itself, and that would be quite exciting for me. Thinking back to previous anniversary issues and final issues, I always want more. You know, I want not just double-sized, I want a backup story, some pinups. I mean, I guess no one does pinups anymore because that's what variant covers are for. But anyway, Ron Joseph and Nitho Diaz coming back for something in the next 5 issues. That sounds great.
Very good. What next? Oh yeah, we were talking about. I mentioned as well about the kind of Dawn and Helix fighting the casino bots and the somewhat dismissive nature of the dialogue. No models we haven't engaged before. No surprises. It does feel like after they were kind of introduced as the big bad, and Dawn and Helix sort of had this big struggle to defeat one in the first appearance, that they do seem to be increasingly disposable. There doesn't seem to be too, in the last issue they were killing off swathes in the hotel corridors. Here they take on another 3, and Roadblock sneaks up behind another and just pulls its head off. It does seem like they're just a little bit more disposable than when we first encountered them, and I think that kind of diminishes the jeopardy a little bit.
Yeah, and that's also part of the problem with making them so hard to kill in the first place. Back in Artificial Intelligence, when Destro and Baroness were fighting some blue ninjas, and he was using his wrist rockets, 2 things need to happen. Either you introduce some element like these new ones are weaker, either the like 0001 says that, or the Joes observe it, like, oh, their armor plating isn't as, or the reader sort of assumes that there's this shorthand going on. Like, okay, well, it took half an issue for a couple Joes to take down one of these robots 5 issues ago, 20 issues ago, but they did it. So now we can somewhat skip past it. And I think that's asking a lot of the reader in a book that's sort of grounded and doesn't have a lot of that kind of sort of shorthand, because it starts to place the blue ninjas or the Revanche bats on the same level as sort of any Cobra soldier, any Viper, and Roblox's not going to tear a normal person's head off. But yes, as much as I liked the ninja fight with these 3 robots in this issue in the access tunnel, it didn't seem harder than a normal fight. There were many episodes, 2 or 5 or 10 episodes ago, I talked for a few minutes about sort of the like escalating stakes where you can't escalate them anymore. And I was talking about DC Comics and their events, their cosmic events like Crisis on Infinite Earths and the new one, Dark Crisis. And I talked about how the multiverse seems to keep getting bigger, but in sort of an uninteresting linear way. And I sort of see that happening here, where to the point you just made, if it did take half an issue previously to take out one of these robots, and now you can do it in 2 pages, that is asking the reader to sort of compress a lot of stakes of danger. Sort of, while I'm not worried about the Joes, if in this 2-page fight, the Joes had taken out these 3 robots and 2 of the Joes had been injured, or they take out the robots and then right when they get through the doorway after the fight, the 3 robots then like stand up and sort of like hobbling after them, like, okay, they didn't really take them out. It does feel like it could have an added note or level.
When I saw an interesting sort of note as well about some of these fights and the fact that it seems like we've seen a lot of bats, we've seen a lot of blue ninjas, and we've seen a lot of these casino bots. And the common thread between them is, they're robots and can easily be killed, and it's potentially slightly more palatable and less grisly than slicing or shooting into a human. And actually, there is a fairly grisly sequence that you pointed to before, where we do get a couple of the humans being killed. And there's a panel with Dawn slicing into a Technoviper, and Sean is cutting into a Viper from shoulder down to belly by the looks of things. Bzash is the sound effect.
Yeah, this is page 15. One of the 2 pages that I was referring to at the end of my comment about the color. Do you have an added? Do you want to say anything else about this, the sword slashing here, and then it's people? Or are you just finishing
It was a sort of a fairly finished thought, but I think possibly that might be coming into play with the kind of, and as a thought as to why we seem to be seeing so many bats, robots, Revanche, blue ninjas, etc. That as an idea, then that the Joes are defeating them and destroying them. It's slightly more palatable than kind of the thinking about the consequences of, killing real life humans.
I wonder if Hama it's less about sort of the action of it or the quotes violence of it. I sometimes wondered if Hama has this interest in technology, which leads him back to something like the brainwave scanner or bats and revanche and artificial intelligence as a concept, not as a 4-part story. And because the Joes don't do social media, they're not on their smartphones, they don't play PlayStation, but in the real world we spend a lot of time on our devices, feeling connected or feeling quote connected. And there are reasons to be worried about how much time someone spends with technology, or companies that are tracking us because we have smartphones or we have smart cars, or we sign up for all these things and we check the box, yes, I read your terms and conditions. And I wonder if in a subtle way, bats and revanche and mindbenders stuff coming into G.I. Joe is Hama playing in that arena a little bit in a way that, shooting a bunch of Technovipers isn't as interesting or doesn't say anything extra. No one in the G.I. Joe comic has said, like, I'm worried about Revenge taking over the world. Or maybe someone did. But I don't think it's going to happen. Like, let's say this G.I. Joe comic kept going past 300. Let's say IDW had the license for another couple years. I don't think, at like 350, Revenge would have taken over the world. But abstractly in the background, that is a concern of mine for this story, that this company, this, 0001,
00001 0000001
does have that ability and that power, and that's not something we've seen in G.I. Joe. Like, I haven't read any Terminator comics, but I have read a wonderful RoboCop versus Terminator comic, and in Terminator comics, there's this concern that the Terminators are going to take over the world. But at the same time, Mark, do note how many flesh and blood Cobra soldiers show up in this issue, right? And in one or two previous episodes, I have gotten excited when a Technoviper shows up and does a Technoviper thing, when they fix a thing or they show up to do some computer or mechanical repair stuff, because that's such a great action figure to make for a toy line. But since he's not a combat guy and he doesn't come with a gun, he comes with like a welding laser and a giant claw and a hammer or whatever. As a kid, you play with it wrong. You just give him a gun, or you just like, well, this is a gun, even though it looks like a claw. It shoots lasers. But, a bunch of different kinds of Vipers specifically get called into this issue, and then they form a barrier between the Joes and Mindbender's tech, and then there's this shootout with them. So there is a division in this issue between what, the humans are doing and what the robots are doing as a theme for the last, 100 issues of Hama's G.I. Joe.
Interesting.
Or he's just making it up as he goes. He gets to page 17, like, I think Mindbender should call some people in. He should probably call in some Vipers.
And the treatment of, because Revanche and the Blue Ninjas aren't always allied with Cobra, I guess the treatment of them is that it's very much implied that in degrees of badness that Revanche is worse than Cobra generally. That if it's one against the other, then your sympathies are meant to lie with Cobra.
Did I make a guess in our last episode that maybe in 300 Joe and Cobra would team up to stop Revenge?
I don't know if you said that before, but you've said it now.
Yeah, I just said it now.
Not the first time that it's happened.
And it happened in the cartoon too. It happened in the Games Master, and I can't think of any other episodes, but it definitely happened in one or two other episodes.
Very good. I think that's covered most of my main talking points. The other one was maybe to just get your thoughts on Cobra Commander schmoozing with the customers on the casino floor and discussing Muzak playlists.
So now that I've already in a previous issue read him doing this stuff, It's like, why isn't he scary? Why isn't he walking around with a gun or making threats or on TV, ransoming these people? I think what Hama might be going for, or might be allowing himself the room to go for, is that Cobra is actually more dangerous if it is legitimate. And we can go back to the fantasy of it as this bad guy army that conquers. And I have not read issues 155 through 160, I think, since they came out. 156 through 160, right? When Cobra took over the White House, because that story, it didn't, if you and I ever do a series of episodes where we start back at the beginning of the IDW run, I can get into this, but that story didn't work for me. I like the idea of it. I don't like how it turned out. But, like you see this in Daredevil comics where, you think Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, is scary as a crime boss. Just wait until he's the mayor of New York, right? Which is happening in the last couple of years of Marvel Comics, or going back to around the year 2000 with DC Comics and Superman. You think Lex Luthor is scary as a billionaire evil scientist industrialist. Just wait until he's president. So I don't know that this version of G.I. Joe would ever get there. But as much as I don't want Cobra Commander schmoozing with two gambling civilians, like it's a little silly. It is a nice contrast from him, like, just talking to Mindbender and like worrying about Snake Eyes, which is sort of the main two things he's been doing for the last couple of issues. And it is a funny conversation with snake references and puns. And it very nicely sets up, it gives him a reason. The reason why I like it is that I don't actually want him to have this conversation. I want him to be yelling at Destro or freaking out at Dr. Mindbender, or rubbing his hands together, looking at security footage of the Joes because he has them in his sights. But in terms of motivation, it gives him a reason to see all of the Vipers with boxes under their arms running into the lab, and then to interrupt one of them. And then he looks over his shoulder and he sees all of the bats looking at him, which is a really good panel. And I say this with the utmost respect. I think Shannon Gallant pulls off a great panel for a difficult timeline, but this is definitely one of those panels that I think he was referring to when a few weeks ago, I think you contacted him and he said, yes, these issues have been drawn rather quickly. This is a panel. This is the bottom of page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's just enough information in these characters and these background tables and people and slot machines and the wall that you know what it is. But that's definitely a panel that I'm sure the penciler of this book and the inker of this book wanted to put more into and didn't have the time. But it's funny and creepy. And it's a great beat, right?
Why are you all staring at me?
That the plot is turning, that something is changing. And so one of the things that I like about Hama's G.I. Joe, and I think I sort of discovered this when Andrew Wildman, like 10 years ago, maybe longer now, 15 years ago, finally started selling some of his art. He'd not sold his art for a long time, and he was not selling covers, but he sold some G.I. Joe interior pages. And I got a page from, I think, his first issue, and it's Cover Commander talking with some, I think, Vipers. And when you look at the original art, or maybe because you're running a podcast or typing a blog, you sometimes pay attention to a page of G.I. Joe as a discrete unit in and of itself, not part of a larger scene, not part of an issue, not part of a larger story. And what Hama often does that I find really entertaining is a single page makes its own little story. And sometimes the final panel is a little funny. And this page is a good example, right? On the main floor of the casino. So here's two panels that I, on the surface, don't agree with, where Cobra Commander is talking to this guy in a mustache and a V-neck, athletic shirt, gambling, right?
How are you doing here? Have you tried our free buffet? Are you happy with the service?
What? But no, it's like Darth Vader wouldn't, It's like Darth Vader shows up at one of the cantinas on on Tatooine. You know, it's like,
We'll conquer this planet soon, but for now, are you enjoying your beverage?
it's like, no. But
Hold on.
If you-
Hold on.
Have you tried the blue milk?
that analogy doesn't work because the Empire doesn't own that bar on that planet. And Cobra definitely owns Cobra Casino on Cobra Island. But that Cobra Commander has 2 panels for this patter, and then has 2 panels to not quite panic, but get confused and nervous. And then the final panel at the end where he literally turns, he's looking over his shoulder. But like something's happening in the scene, right? And I find this page, because of that final panel, like funny and quite satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I would say, if artwork nowadays had the lettering on the artwork itself, if it wasn't a separate layer in a computer somewhere else, it would be fun to own this page. Because on a wall in a frame, like this isn't a cover, and this isn't a splash page, and it's not a fight scene. It's not a big reveal, you know, like Snake Eyes hugs Scarlet and one of them is crying or something. But like as a representation of something about G.I. Joe that you would consider not first or second or third, this page is really funny and quite interesting.
I've actually got an I Spy that relates to this page, so should we do it?
Yeah.
I spy with my little eye.
So there's a line where they're doing the puns with the music.
You don't like White Snake? I'll make sure they change up the rotation. Maybe slip in some Cab Calloway like Viper's Drag.
Wouldn't mind some Three Dog Night.
Excuse me, I have to take care of something.
So I don't know if this is completely intentional or not, presumably, but you might remember the Funny or Die music video, The Ballad of G.I. Joe, which was very nicely done. And there's a lyric in that says, Cobra Commander loves 70s boogie, and he is a fan of Three Dog Night.
Cobra Commander loves 70s boogie, and he's a big fan of Three Dog Night. What is the loneliest number? And when he takes over the world, the first thing he'll do is make them reunite.
Well, if I had to guess, I wouldn't guess that Hama is referring to that video here. Hama is a musician, has seen a lot of music, has made a lot of music, has played with a lot of musicians. And I think he's trying to pick a band or performer that fits with this guy. Like baseball cap, mustache guy. But it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
One more little thing about how much I like this page. In that second panel that you just read from, Cobra Commander is both looking at the guy, but he's also already turning his head away from us toward the back of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another great, subtle bit of anatomy of acting a drawing. I have an I Spy if we're doing I Spies. My I Spy comes on the second to last page, on page 19, in panel 2. Jinx, who has been in civvies, seems to be back in her costume here for the mop up, but is holding her weapon. And I'm gonna allow it. Objection, Your Honor, overruled. I'm gonna allow it. I don't mind that she's all of a sudden in her costume. Cause I'm trying to.
They've thought about this. They've prepared for it. So Dawn, up until this point, has been wearing a backpack which has got a pointy outy element to it. And then when they're back in the lab with Jinx, there's a panel where she's been given the backpack. It's a top panel of one of the pages. Dawn's in front of a tube, and Jinx has the backpack back on. We cut away, and then we're back in the scene, and she's obviously taken out her uniform out of the backpack and unfolded her pointy stick.
So I like seeing her pointy stick because, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't see it much in the Marvel run.
No,
right?
No.
And we certainly don't see it in the animated movie, her one appearance in this costume in animation. And I find it funny. It's like, I don't think this is, I'm sure it showed up once in a Ron Wagner issue. I'm not sure. I'm sure if I gave you 10 minutes, you could tell us definitively. But I don't think this is the first appearance of this weapon in the Marvel IDW Hama continuity, but I would find it very funny if it was.
Yeah, I think it has turned up a couple of times in the IDW continuity.
Right, okay. I've got a little I Spy in the final pages of this issue. There are 2 panels where a Joe is tying a Viper's hands together behind their back with plastic wrist ties, which is another opportunity for some great acting and body language, right? Because you stand a certain way if your arms are behind you and someone's shackling them. You mentioned one of the I Spies, but I wanted to talk about it for a second. A few pages earlier, when during the fight, Dawn slashes a Technoviper and Throwdown slashes a 1986 Viper. There's a lot of blood, and I think realistically that is the blood you would see if this happened. But I also think many comics, G.I. Joe and otherwise, have gotten away with, for these kinds of slashes, having no blood or very little blood. And if G.I. Joe wants to be realistic, we should see the blood and it should be red. If G.I. Joe wants to tone it down, it draws a lot of attention if there is a lot of blood, but then it's brown. Because then this feels like it's the 70s or the 80s, and it is a Comics Code Authority rule, like no exit wounds and blood can't be red and no vampires and authority can't be shown as corrupt and villains have to be punished, right? Like going back to the 50s and the beginnings of the Comics Code Authority. Yeah. So
careful how much sweat you show. All of that.
So I like this panel, but it sort of sticks out. Like, and a couple artists in the IDW run have, I don't want to say experimented with, but sort of played around with more blood when characters are shot or cut. And that is more realistic, but that's sort of never been this book. And if, someone at Hasbro is a little anxious about this stuff showing up in the book, or if someone at IDW is a little anxious and it's like, oh, why don't we color that brown? I would go back a step further and say, let's just not have as much. Not because it's sort of always been that way. Like, this has never been a gratuitous book.
And there might be something thematically going on in terms of amping up the stakes in the level of violence from Dawn and Sean, because it has been something that we have seen in the last few issues where they're
freaking out.
They're kind of freaking out, going into berserker mode. Maybe there's something under the surface there.
That's a good point. I mean, Dawn does tear up 3 pages later, and as I saw that, I thought of several things at once. I thought, okay, so she's had this emotional beat twice in the last couple of issues where she's having a hard time and she's talking with Scarlet about it. And I also thought of our co-host Jay Cordray for our Devil's Due episodes and how he and I have frowned at some female characters in the Devil's Due G.I. Joe tearing up in a way that the male characters don't, and how it seems like the 2 genders are treated a little unevenly. But I think this is earned, and even though we sort of assume it's sort of like every Joe's the same age, the way that like every superhero is like, I guess 29, like Peter Parker 29, Bruce Wayne 29, but no, Dawn really is younger than the other Joes, because she was just in high school, and through the magic of a couple issues went by and they said so, she got through the training. So I thought, okay, we don't see characters cry much in G.I. Joe. This one does feel earned.
My last I Spy was just at the back of the book. Serpentor Resurrected, Cobra's Deadliest Warrior, leads the treacherous march to issue 300. So we do get a use of that Serpentor pin-up that Nitho Diaz drew for the cover of the new Serpentor hardcover, actually within the pages of the regular book as well, which is nice to see.
Yeah, this is so Mark's referring to a full page ad, which sits where I would prefer there be a letters page, where for the last several months there has instead been a full page ad for Saturday Morning #1. This image has interesting color because it is all in red. All of Serpentor's in red, his chair, I should say throne, and of course the logo behind him, although there's some light sourcing, so there's a lot of rendering going on. There's light red and medium red and dark red. Or maybe I should say less saturated red and more saturated red. And it is interesting that this image is not being used to advertise that hardcover, which is a thing that IDW could sell, but rather the image is being used to hype the story that's about to start. Whereas you'd think that maybe they would just use like the other cover for the next issue, use cover A for the next issue. But I think as the license is running out of time at IDW, there's a little bit of scrambling and hopscotch. So, but yes, it's nice to see this image, which I'd only seen in pencil form, I guess, on Diaz's Facebook page, and in ink form on a like distributor listing for this hardcover, which has like issues 48 through 50 something plus yearbook 2 from the Marvel run.
Yeah, a few sort of scattered issues. I think possibly they didn't have the actual cover of 296 to hand, because they've got the variant cover
on the previous page for next month.
By Jamie Sullivan with the big Cobra lineup. So the remaining covers for 296 are a John Royal Dusty and Outback cover, which doesn't, so it's not really appropriate to use as a, coming up in the next issue kind of thing. And it looks at the Gallant cover, which is a throwdown and a gaming table. It only appeared on my radar a couple of weeks ago. So I think that it probably is only recently been completed. So it might have been when they were trying to put the cover together, the Gallant cover was not available, and there wasn't really another story kind of graphic that they could use. So possibly that's why they went to this one. And no bad thing.
Since my ARAH Detected is going to be about color on the last page, I am going to talk for a moment about this cover for the next issue because it is on the right side. So I mentioned earlier in this episode, Jay Brown's coloring is too busy for me, and there's a lot of rendering and there are too many light sources, and I find a lot of it muddy. Here's a contrast, right? So on the last page of this issue, you see some Joes and some Cobras on the left side. And then on the right side, you see this cover for the next issue, which has a very different color treatment. That's all I'll say about that.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
My error detected is on the final page of this issue. There is a Night Viper who's in the negative space between Scarlet's torso and her weapon. And the Night Viper is not colored green. He's colored orange like an Alley Viper. And there is an Alley Viper 3 people over on the right.
Yeah. I can kind of get how that happened, but it is definitely a Night Viper. I'd spotted that one. My second error detected was less of an error and more of an element of story logic. So we called it out before that seems to have been a repeated use of Sean being called Sean on mission within sight of video cameras and potentially robots recording them and so on. And previously in the comics they've talked about, we call Sean's code name when we're not on a mission is Throwdown. We're on a mission, we should call him Snake Eyes, and it's very important that we always call him Snake Eyes so that Cobra think that Snake Eyes is still alive and a threat and so on. So they've made a big point of this, but on several points through the issue he was called Sean. Helix says, Sean, you should take point. Scarlet says, trigger the breaching charge, Sean. Dawn says, Sean, I need your sword. And Dawn later says, maybe we need to do right by Sean too, talking about the brainwave scanner. So quite a few specifically within this issue, and I tried to think about how would you explain it. There's a few ways of doing it. The least interesting is saying that it's writer error, so let's skip past that one. Another one could be, in the heat of the moment, the Joes are just making it an error and calling him Sean. I don't like to think of the Joes sort of making those sort of errors. So I want to, would hope that wasn't the answer too. So I came up with one thought, which was that my no prize is that Sean, the other Joes aren't actually calling him Sean on mission. It's a shorthand for the audience to understand that this is not Snake Eyes. This is another character pretending to be Snake Eyes. So they are actually on mission calling him Snake Eyes, but as a shorthand, we are seeing them calling him Sean.
Sean is actually an acronym, S.E.A.N, for Snake Eyes Ever as Normal. It's a way of saying, Cobra, if you're listening, this is definitely Snake Eyes. Snake Eyes Ever as Normal. It's right here.
Snake Eyes. I don't know. It's just normal Snake Eyes.
My no prize is that they're trying to trick Cobra by making Cobra think that they're getting sloppy, and they're saying this guy's top secret first name, and then Cobra can start to plan sort of to no positive effect. It's like, oh, we know Snake Eyes' real name, it's Sean, and that would throw off Cobra, because the real Snake Eyes, we never knew his name, and he's dead.
Mm-hmm. I reached out to Diana and Diana Davis and asked for her thoughts on what this might be. If she's sent me a voicemail, I'll insert it here.
Just a G.I. Joe fan. After only one man. It's the Joe First Sergeant Dude. Thank you, man.
For me, this is more complex, and this is just as a reader, okay? So, first off, she's in a firefight, she's in a battle, and there's all this going on. And Scarlett's perfectly aware that probably only the person directly next to her could possibly hear her in that. Going into the inside of Scarlett, more deeply, Snake Eyes was her lover for many years, and Sean is not Snake Eyes. He looks like Snake Eyes. He acts like Snake Eyes. Sometimes he doesn't talk, but he's not Snake Eyes. And she's going to make pretty clear that this is not the man she loves so much. Sean is also young enough to be her son. And any twinge of romantic intimacy, anything beyond mothering or friendship or camaraderie, probably makes her feel pretty uncomfortable, because that's a kid. That's a young boy. Finally, in just recent issues, we know Dawn's been telling Snake Eyes that she's got these weird jealous feelings popping up about seeing Scarlett with Sean, because Snake Eyes is riding around in her noggin. I mean, those are memories and psyche and feeling, but just that's Snake Eyes. He's riding around in there and he's seeing this and he's jealous. And Scarlett's heard that. And so I think this is going to add to that discomfort. Scarlett's going to make very clear aloud for Snake Eyes to see and for her to feel that she is not in love with Sean. She doesn't think Sean is Snake Eyes. And he's Sean, not Snake Eyes. That's just how I'm reading this.
Snake Eyes Ever as Normal. Snake Eyes essentially awesome now. Shirley. Don't call me Shirley.
Cool.
There used to be a pudding that was over-egged. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. At first it was British, but then it was Commonwealth. You know the pudding. You know the pudding. But now there's a new player in town, a comic book writer of some renown. He's using real-world examples and peppering the issues with lots of samples. It's a Larry Hammer colloquialism. He's talking G.I. Joe and all its heroism. Can you guess what it is? Is it something new? Now listen as Larry drops a slice of real life on you.
Hammer's colloquialisms. I had kind of two. One I'll skip by, and another proper one. So, the Dr. Mindbend refers to Genghis Cobra as a homunculus, and actually, I've used homunculus as a colloquialism before, back when we were looking at Yearbook 2019. That was with Chief on that episode. A homunculus is an artificially made dwarf, supposedly produced in a flask by an alchemist or a diminutive human being. And so the typical definition is a sort of a mini-me diminutive type clone rather than just a standard clone or vat. But yeah, interesting word to use, and more interesting than just saying clone. The actual colloquialism I wanted to highlight was roadblock saying something ain't kosher in Denmark. That's a modification to the quote, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, which is a line spoken by Marcellus in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, Act 1. It's idiomatic, saying something is not right.
Quote of the week, 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 quote of the week.
My favorite line of dialogue is at the bottom of page 1. It's Dr. Mindbender. All Vipers and Technovipers, draw your weapons and report to my lab immediately. All Specialized Vipers, report with their full combat load to the staging area in the parking lot, and await orders from Crimson Guard Laura 343. Because I like all of the Vipers, all the different kinds of Vipers, and we don't get to see them as much as I'd like, and we don't get to see different combinations of them. And here on page 1, I'm promised we're going to see a bunch of them.
Excellent. My favourite line of dialogue is typically for me a bit of an insult. It is, who is it? It's a girl with black hair. I'm going to have to navigate to the page. It is a girl with black hair who I see now has got a bit of red on her top, which means it is Jinx. She is shouting at Mindbender, "You just step away from that tube, Baldy. That pile of resuscitated dead guy isn't going to be leading anything in the near future."
Let's talk about SFX, baby. Let's talk about pew and scree. Let's talk about shooting gun things and the sound effects. We'll see. Let's talk about SFX. Let's talk about SFX.
And as well as a favorite line of dialogue, I have a favorite sound effect. Now, I've split this in two. I have a favorite sound effect and treatment of sound effect. On page 12, there's a giant pathoom for the explosion that the Joes set to break into the lab. And I think that's a really great treatment. I think the visual that Neil Iwatake does here, where it's behind the Vipers and Mindbender, but it's in front of the explosion. And then the letters themselves are transparent, so you can see the explosion sort of through it. And it's big, bold, capital letters. I like that a lot, and almost like a varsity font. But on the next page, for the onomatopoeia quality of it, on the third panel, everyone, the sound of roadblock tearing a bat's head off is psh, cronk. Which I think is both twisting and tearing off. That's sort of, I think the first four letters of it, a little bit of that are either the electrical crackle, or maybe some pneumatic, some gas leaking out of a tube.
And then a ponk as he throws it off over his shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, reminds me of one of my favorite jokes. What goes ha ha bonk?
What?
Someone laughing their head off. What? Tim, what goes ha ha ponk?
What?
A casino bat laughing its head off.
What goes ha ha psh cronk?
Psh cronk.
Casino bat getting his head torn off by a roadblock on Covert Island at night outside in the jungle.
Cool. So I think that's us done talking about that issue. Next time on Talking Joe, we will be covering the latest issue of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, which will be 296, which I believe will be the start of the new arc, although continuing this arc, called All In. Let's find out if it actually is called that when it comes out. It is due out 3rd of August, which is 3 weeks away from the last issue, this issue that just came out. Continuing the almost fortnightly G.I. Joe. So look forward to that. So Tim, where can people find you?
My partners and I post video essays at our YouTube page, which is Atomic Abe. My comic book store is Hub Comics, and my G.I. Joe blog is A Real American Book.
.com. Excellent. And yeah, if people want to find a wide array of G.I. Joe comics, one of the best places to go is over there in Hub Comics. So you can find the show in all of the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that has links to all of those places. We've got a Facebook group. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We post all episodes as an audio-only podcast, but we also stick them on YouTube as a video podcast with images flashing up as we talk about them. So if you're not subscribed, like and subscribe. We're also on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe, where you can donate as much or as little as you like to support the show and cover all of those subscription costs that keep this thing running. So big thanks to backers Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, and Rob, the latest subscriber, who are all getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. And that's us done. But
we're gonna do Yo Joage.
We missed it out. What did I do?
7. I give this a 7 or a 6.
Okay.
I give this a 6. It's a good 6. It's not a mean 6. It's a good 6.
Fair enough. I'll go in. I'll go in with a 6 as well. I think we've talked enough about the reasons behind that. But hopefully we'll be upping the scores as we progress over the next few months. So that is us done. But remember that
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Wow. Energy. Laters.